This episode of the Nerdball Podcast is sponsored by Jake Paluski at Real JP Multimedia. He does the music for this podcast. He has produced this podcast. If you need anything audio-visual done, he is the man to see at realjp.com, REELJP.com. Let's start the show.
I'm Matthew Ross, and this is the Nerdball Podcast.
This is the Nerdball Podcast with Lorenzo Melcher.
All right, Matthew, thank you for coming on my podcast today. We met a while ago when you were a teacher at Owens. I always feel weird when I was at BG, I feel like they were all professors. And then when I was at Owens, I was like, I think they're still professors, or I don't know if they're teachers, or I always felt weird. Like, how do we address that?
No worries, man. I don't have my PhD, so I never was technically a professor, but I answered to anything, you know.
All right.
Mr. Ross, Mr. Matt, as you know, with some of our students that were volunteers for me at the Botanic Garden. If people call me professor, that's fine, but I was never technically a professor. I was an instructor.
Oh, okay. All right. So the first thing I have people do is just let me know something that you've been really nerding out about, something you've been into lately. If it's books, TV show, movies, just a hobby you're doing. The only thing it can't be your job. So it can't be what you do, but what you do outside of that you're just super into right now.
Well, when I saw first off that the title of the podcast is the Nerdball Podcast, I'm like, well, man, I've been a nerd my whole life. You know, when I was a kid, it was like I could see a baseball card and tell you exactly who I got it from, where I got it, you know, and was all in on baseball. And then it, switched into everybody wanted to be marine biologist because, product of the 80s, you had Jacques Cousteau. Okay. And you're like, I needed to know every fish. And you had like every fish book and zoo books and like, and I was ADD. So, I'm like watching the Tigers game, reading zoo books and like watching a documentary right afterwards on like the life, the life of Jacques Cousteau. Yeah. So I've always been a total nerd and kind of all encompassing. I think right now, some of the things I'm most into, I'd say if you talk to me now, I'd be the Pine Barrens of New Jersey.
Okay.
Explain
what that is.
Yeah. So 1.1 million acres of undeveloped land for the most part. There's a couple homes and things within it, but like for the most part, central Jersey, central South Jersey.
Okay.
There is that division, the north.
Oh yeah. I listened to a Chris Gethard podcast and he talks about the division between those.
Oh yeah. So I'm talking about like the south half of Jersey, but the whole center part of it.
Got it.
Is 1.1 million acres of just amazing ecosystem. I mean, it's like what the world looked like back in the 1700s.
Okay.
So you've got, areas of deep swamp with peat bogs. You've got areas that are rolling sand environments, like kind of like what you have in the oak openings.
Yeah.
But a very different vibe. It's a place of mysticism. It's a place of cryptids. You got the New Jersey Devil. So I've been to a lot of the fabled spots that the New Jersey Devil either lives or emerges from the depths of hell through these big blue holes in the ground.
Yeah.
It's just an amazing place. And ultimately it's beautiful. I mean, I love plants. Everything around my life revolves around chlorophyll.
Sure.
And I just love plants and it's an amazing place. I mean, there's things you'll see there that it just blows your mind. And you're like, how is this New Jersey? You know?
So is this like a park? Like they have trails and stuff through it, or is it just like an open area?
So it's a national Pinelands Reserve, and then within it, there's a bunch of different parks. So just like how the Oak Openings is set up, where you've got, state forest and municipal parks and the metro parks all kind of converging.
Okay.
It's very similar, where it's a network of, state forests, state parks, all throughout it. And then there's parts that are just kind of like unincorporated that you can just go and be wild. And, I may or may not have, I don't know if I should disclose this on a recorded podcast, but I may or may not have been in some of the areas that are, kind of off the beaten path by a lot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Like you go to the one spot, it's the Pygmy Pine Forest, and it's like 3 foot, 4 foot tall pine trees that are just massive. It's 12,000 acres as far as you can see.
Mm-hmm.
And right next to it's a massive bombing range. So you've got the government dropping bombs right next to where you're at. The ground shakes and rattles and everything. I mean, it's insane.
Wow.
And it looks like it's straight out of Stranger Things. I mean, every time I go there, I'm on Instagram and I'm like, cue the Stranger Things. Let's see this giant, watchtower that looks like an alien spaceship landed in the middle of New Jersey amongst all these, 3 and 4 foot tall pine trees. It's wild, man.
Your description of it makes it very appealing to go check it out.
Yeah. Best place in this area to catch a sunset. It's like like the pinnacle overlook on the Susquehanna. But man, the Pine Barrens is a magical place. There's cool. A couple really awful B movies about it too.
Sure.
So there's one called The Barrens, and it's like one of the guys from True Blood trying to pretend to be from Jersey, but he's British.
Oh no.
So, like the accents are all over the board. And they're trapped out and he's trying to see if he is the Jersey Devil or not.
Oh wow.
So yeah, I'd say B-movie horror films that involve plants might be the other thing I've been nerding out on recently. And I mean, we could talk a full hour about that one.
Sure. That might be you might have to come back on to talk about that stuff. Well, I'll put you on assignment and have you do some research on plant-based horror movies.
Yeah. I actually did a program for it at work. And
did you?
I was trying to change it up because we're a pretty formal operation. And I'm like, well, you know what? Let's get informal.
Yeah.
Let's do it at a local drinking establishment and gathering place, like the community hub. And let's have some fun with this. It's
That's
not
cool.
just the Mandrake from Harry Potter.
Yeah.
It's not just, Audrey too. There's so many other like crazy, weird, horrible movies from like the 60s, 70s, 80s. I mean, it's a trip, man.
Well, what was that movie? I forget what it was called now. Maybe The Happening, where I think it was the plants were like giving off some sort of chemical or something.
Don't give away the ending, man. You just ruined M. Night Shyamalan's twist.
Okay, that's like a billion years ago. So I'll put a spoiler alert in the show notes. But I remember my boss at the time. This is over 10 years ago. He's like, so there's in part of the movie, there's a guy riding a lawnmower and he just gets off and lays in front of it. And my boss, he's so like practical. He's like, that would never happen. The safety features on that mower would cut the mower off. It wouldn't even start running. Yeah. I go, all right, man, it's a movie. Let it be.
That's the type of stuff that I'm into, man. Like the part or the happening when it came out. So it's filmed in Philly.
Okay.
I moved out here, a couple of years ago, about 9 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And because of movies like The Sixth Sense, because of The Happening, I knew all these places. I'm like, oh man, that's Rittenhouse Square. Like that would not have happened. No, come on. like it is way too nice of a park to see that happen. Come on, no, you can't do that. and then I kind of got hooked on M. Night a little bit and was trying to find like where he filmed The Village is right near where I'm at.
Wow.
And it's interesting. They did an interview with him and he was talking about The Happening in particular. And he got the idea while I was in the train from New Jersey back home to Philadelphia area. And I'm like, I think he wrote the entire script on that train ride. like here's the scenario. Mark Wahlberg, Zooey Deschanel looks surprised. and the voice of reason is Marky Mark, right? Who's a biology teacher in high school who's like, it's got to be the plants.
People either really love those movies or like, man, this dude is off his rocker and none of these are good.
Yeah. I mean, Sixth Sense is probably one of the greatest movies, horror movies. When you all see that, and spoiler alert, it's got, a lot of twists.
Yeah.
And when you find out the biggest twist about it, you're like, man, this is brilliantly done. And I studied film along with horticulture. So before I went to Michigan State, I was studying film in community college when I was in high school.
Okay.
And I just got entranced. I mean, I'm a total film buff.
Wow. Okay.
And like the directorial style that Shyamalan put out was just like, man, you're like the next Michael Mann. Yeah. And then you see Lady in Water, and I like it. I think I might be the only person, but you're like, there's not only some of the worst one-liners in it, like this is a bedtime story to scare the crap out of kids? Really?
I never even heard of that movie. So
Oh man. Oh yeah. If you need an hour and a half to just lose yourself, it'll make you rethink hotel pools. I'll tell you that much.
okay, all right. So what we've learned so far is you're a lot better at not spoiling movies than I am. So
Yeah, true.
when you were talking about going in that forest and like in the bomb areas and stuff, I listened to a podcast where they were trying to save this particular kind of butterfly, and they noticed that they were trying to like save habitats and this kind of stuff, and they noticed where the butterflies were flourishing were on places like that where they tested weapons, and they discovered that all the disruption that is causing is making plants that this butterfly needs, beneficial plants, making them survive and thrive in these areas for whatever reason. I'm sure they explained it, but I was, I don't remember. But I thought that was interesting that they put all these efforts into like regrowing these lands and saving it, and the best spot is where they were doing nothing, and actually they were destroying things, and it was helping out immensely.
Exactly. Yeah, Amy Corman, if you ever get a chance to run across her, she is an entomologist that worked for the U.S. Army. And we forget sometimes that the military owns huge tracts of land.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about a military base, it's a large open area for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
There are the facilities, there are the equipment and the vehicles, but they own a lot of land. And on that land, there's not a lot of human disruption. So it's one or the other, right? You either have preserved land that's in relatively good shape because it's been, tended to, or you have the disruption, like what you do, like what you were talking about. And for a lot of insects, they love that. It's like, this is what would have happened because back in the day, fire would have gone through here. If you're a fire-based ecology, the land would have been stripped multiple times. And then look at this. This is the perfect habitat for this insect or this bird. And yeah, a lot of times that disruption is helpful, which is surprising to a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, I learned too in school is that, hey, there's some plants that need fire in order for their seeds to open and their seeds to for everything to work, which is like you said, it seems backwards, but that's just part of life. All the things that happen in the world are part of life. We just might be making it worse. So
yeah.
Probably not a might, probably definitely.
Book, The Life After Us or The Life Without Us, The World Without Us.
Yeah, okay. I
know
this
is what would happen to the world if humans weren't here.
Yeah.
And it's wild. I mean, they talk about, buildings crumbling and like zoo animals, if they were all released, like how they would naturalize in different areas and like they would find stasis.
Yeah.
Like we're the disrupting balance.
I think there was a TV show like that too. It might have been based off that book, but yeah, there was a TV show, which for me always makes it better when I can actually see things as opposed to read things. So
yeah.
All right. Well, like I said, I met you when you were faculty at Owens, and I know people that love their jobs and are happy to go to. I love working for the Metro Parks and going there and every day and running Pearson Metro Park, but I've never known someone like you are the epitome of like, I love my job. It doesn't matter. Like I know you through Owens, but you were at TBG and now you're at Longwoods. And whenever I see videos of you, I'm like, this guy, like I said, I love my job, but it makes me feel like I don't because you're so into it, whatever you're doing. And you along with Mr. Foley, like it was both of your passions where I'm like, man, the stuff I'm learning, which I want to do, it made me want to learn it more because you guys were just so into it. Have you always been that way as far as not just what you do, but just in life? Like, hey, if I'm going to be into this, I'm going to be into it 100%.
Oh, totally, man. Yeah. Totally. And I appreciate that. It was really nice of you to put it that way. And, you were there at this awesome time when it was me and Chris Foley, really melding with the students. You guys were as interested as we were. Yeah. And you feed off the energy of your students, right? So being an educator, you see a student that gets excited about something and you just want to harness it. You're like, you just want to have them dive in as deep as they possibly can. Mm-hmm. And I was that way always with plants. So I've always been this mega plant nerd. I mean, like my free time, I'm listening to, Alexis the Black Forager and like how to make acorn meal. I'm not going to do that. I might try it,
sure.
But like, she's this amazing, entity that she's just like this super cool person that's like, hey, by the way, you can eat all this stuff in your neighborhood. I'll tell you, like, this is how you do it.
Wow.
And I fill my life with things like that, with nature photography. But it really boiled down to when I was 3 years old, my grandmother, I was at her house. And I love this story because you know, she's near and dear to me. But it shows just how powerful plants can be. So I'm 3 years old at my grandma's house, and we're eating stuff, right? And I go back to my parents' house, and I go to the front lawn, and I just start eating the grass. And my dad's like, "What is going on, man?" And I'm like, "No, we do this at grandma's." And he's like, man, I got to have a talk with grandma. Either she's slipping into senility, or like there's something you're missing. So we go back to grandma's house, and she's like, "Matthew, this is grass and these are chives. These are two very different things."
Oh, okay.
You know, so she dug up some chives, and you know, the old Dixie cups, the wax coated Dixie cups that you used to have as a kid. She digs up some of the chives and puts them in that. I'm like, no way. Like, yeah, and you can plant it in the ground and it'll grow. So then I had my little chive plant at my parents' vegetable garden, 3 years old. By the time I was 5, like half of her backyard was chives. Right? I'm just like constantly digging them up, putting them somewhere else, you know, go to the neighbors' houses with chives, just plant them in like the Johnny Appleseed of chives at 4 years old, right? And it was that passion, you know, like being able to see how plants are resilient, how they can divide, how they can thrive, and like you're responsible for a biological being. That to me is like a great thrill. And then seeing that and you know, that knowledge and that passion imparted on students, that's you know, contagious. You know, and I look at you and your career and other graduates that like fell in love with plants and nature and landscaping and being able to work one with nature. Like, that's an amazing feeling.
I feel that same way. You know, I coach football but it's the same thing when you say, when someone's excited about it, you just try to harness it and focus them on this, whatever it is. For football, it's this position, you know, let's you figure out this position and learn to love it. And it's the same thing when they go on, and even if they don't, for sports, even if they don't play football in college, but to understand like, hey, I love this thing. I also love accounting, and now that's what I want to do. I learned how to you know, do whatever through football. You know, it is a nice feeling to be like, man, I because you don't know, but you're just like, I hope, or I think I was part of that.
Yeah.
I do want to go back to you planting chives. So I'm assuming that was the beginning of you filling your parents' yard with plants. How did they take that of you just like, hey, I always bring these plants home, I'm throwing them in the yard?
Well, I think they appreciated that more than other things I would bring home.
Okay.
Because I was a curious kid, right? And we had a park, Dodge Park, named for the Dodge brothers, right near where I grew up, about a mile away. And we had this in 5th and 6th grade, you raced frogs and turtles. And that was like the coolest thing. The end of the year, everybody circles up and everybody puts their frog in the middle and the first frog to the end. I mean, this is probably not allowed now. I mean, I look back at it and I'm like, this is like amphibicide.
Where would you get these frogs from? You just pick them up?
So I'd go to the park.
Okay, all right.
And I had a Folgers can, like an old Folgers can, coffee can. I always wanted to have a pond.
Okay.
And I needed to get this frog. I needed to win, right? So like every year, I wanted to get the frog that would be the fastest frog.
Yeah.
And I had to win. So I was like, I'll train him at my house. I'm like, I'll draw a chalk circle and I'm going to get the frog to be the fastest frog. And that's the one I'm going to take. So the landscaping of vegetable gardening, that's pretty mundane, right? You know, like worst case scenario, you're going to till it in, you're going to throw some grass over it and you're good, right?
Yeah.
You start digging holes next to the foundation of a house and putting a hose next to it because you needed a pond.
Oh, no.
For your frogs. That gets a little bit more intrusive. You know, parents go away for the weekend, the neighbors call and they're like, something's going on at your house. I think your pool might have sprung a leak. And I'm like, no, Matt he just hooked up the hose and left it on for 3 days and had a puddle that became a river that's now onto 17 Mile Road, you know? So,
oh my, you know, it's so, and my dad always told me like, kids are gonna get into stuff but you know, you got to let them figure stuff out, you know, as long as it's not dangerous for them. And even if it's, you know, a little bit dangerous where they might hurt themselves, you still let them figure it out, you know? And so I'd imagine, you know, your parents were probably upset about it, but then afterward, especially in seeing you now, like, man, they have all these stories of like, yeah, he was destined to do what he's doing because based off A, B, and Z.
Yeah, totally, man. And you look back on it and you're like, this could have been solved, right? Like I could have just had a frog in a terrarium at my house.
Yeah.
But I was like, no, we can't do that. I was a kid that wasn't allowed to have a dog or a cat.
Okay.
So, the dog, it's like you want to go traveling. We traveled a lot as kids.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you want to go to Disney or do you want to have to take care of a dog? It's like, man. And then you're like, the neighbors have a cool dog, so I'll hang out over there.
Yeah.
Like, I always wanted this companion to like hang around, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like watching Ranger Rick, and you'd be like, oh, raccoons. Sure. That would be cool.
Yeah.
I wonder if one could live with me, Yeah, so it's amazing how those little things, those little nuances as a kid, like if I was blessed to have kids, I'd be like, you want a dog, get a dog, let's do this.
Yeah.
Because I don't want you digging a giant hole in the backyard, filling it with water and, having it leak into our basement.
Yeah. Well, I always, my kids are always out in the backyard doing something, and I always find my tools out there. And I tell them, like, hey, you can use my tools, that's fine. But at least put them away. But that's a kid thing. Kids leave. I mean, I'm in my basement right now. It's a mess because my kids leave stuff everywhere. But it's also a cool thing to be like, hey, they're interested in doing all these things or figuring stuff out. They my son and a neighbor down the street, they fixed they had a power wheel and the wheel broke and they fixed it. And I'm like, and it's still running like 2 years later. So it's cool, like for them to get involved in this kind of stuff and learn things on their own, without me having to tell them. So you in high school, you talked about, doing films at community college, going through that. And obviously, you're working your way to plant school at Michigan State. What was that always your choice? Like, hey, I'm going to Michigan State 100%.
No.
Okay.
I was a U of M fan.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay.
I was the rare entity that actually appreciated Drew Henson's skills and was like, man, he's the truth. Like Tom Brady's not going to be anything. Like put in Drew, And then I look back and I'm like, I was trying to sabotage Michigan from the beginning, right?
Yeah, sure,
like,
yeah.
But yeah. And I was like, I got a couple options. I got Syracuse, I got Michigan, I have Northwood and Michigan State. And I was going to go to Syracuse. My dad gets me in the car like any, great father does, and is like, okay, we're doing a site visit. Yeah. Syracuse is quite a ways away. We're going to drive out there. And we left on a Friday. We were going to meet up with, I think, one of the deans or something like that at the business school, and or one of the recruiters from the business school.
Yeah.
My dad and I start driving, and I get the phone call from my friends like, "Hey, man, there's this party going on this weekend."
Oh. No.
We start driving, and I'm like, "Oh, okay. There's a party going on this weekend. What day?" And they're like, "It's on Saturday night." And I'm like, "Okay, Dad, can we get back by Saturday night? Like, can we meet the recruiter and then drive back? There's this party going on. I got to go see." And he's like, "Matt, you realize this is like a 10-hour drive. We're not coming back on Saturday." I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's kind of a bummer, but I get it." And you drive like an hour later, and he sees me checking my phone again. He's like, "So it's that party that you're really excited about, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, my high school sweetheart's going to be there. My cousins are going to be there. My friends. It's this big party. Like it's after a big football game. I'm missing the game. All this." And we go like another half an hour longer. And we stop at one of like the travel stations and grab lunch. And he's like, "So what are you thinking about right now? Like, what are you most excited about with Syracuse?" And I'm like, "Man, this is going to be fun. Syracuse, the Orange Men, like it's far away from home. It's a really good school." And about 10 minutes into the conversation, he's like, "Okay, I got a proposal for you. You can go to the party." I'm like, "Oh, awesome." And he's like, "But you're not going to Syracuse." So I'm like, strike that one off the board. I'm done. I can't go to Syracuse. It's like, you got to give them a personal call. You have to be a man. You got to tell them like you are breaking this appointment and you are not going to go to Syracuse. I'm like, okay. So then I was down to Northwood, U of M, and Michigan State.
Hold on one sec. Hold on. So did he, this whole time, he didn't want you to go there?
No, I mean, it's my parents. They never wanted me to leave the state.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So and this party, did it actually happen, and did you have a good time, or was it one of those things you go back and it just fizzled out?
I think it was more of the latter.
Okay, yeah, that's as most high school parties do. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah.
All right. So your dad was thankful for that, I guess.
And,
oh
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It saved him some gas money, and we had a good time, just the two of us.
Yeah. All right, so that one's crossed off. So then you said Northwood.
I'm down to Michigan, Northwood, and Michigan State, and both Michigan and Northwood, both great schools. Couldn't have been happier to apply to go to Northwood for sure. And it was still in the process of determining if I was going to apply to U of M. Mm-hmm. My brother went to Michigan State, and I came up for a weekend. And my brother, I mean, you want to talk about Nerdball podcast? He's on another level. Like I'm an excited, passionate person.
Yeah.
My brother is like a nerd to the next level. Like as a kid, I aspired to be him. He would just like,
Wow.
Just a brilliant mind.
Mm-hmm.
He'd sit down and figure out a computer game in one night. Right.
Wow.
Like this guy's just a genius. And he went on to be a doctor, and he's a great dad and, faculty at Michigan State Medical College. And I went up and hung out with him for a weekend. And I was like, oh man, this is awesome. Like beautiful campus. I fell in love with the campus. North Campus at Michigan State's a beautiful place. I went over to WJPO Gardens, one of the first botanic gardens in the country, and was just like, this is so cool. And I'm, thinking about what I could do. And my brother's like, Matt, you've been landscaping. Like you love plants. You've always loved plants. We've got this great agricultural school. And I was like, okay, but like, I'm going into business. I'm going into supply chain management. That's what every kid dreams of. Right.
Wait. So you weren't even going to school for something?
No, I wasn't even going to horticulture. No,
really?
No.
I didn't know.
No,
that.
I was going in for business. I was like, I'm going to make as much money, and then I'm going to run a landscaping company. And then like 3 months before school, it's like, I want to be an educator, but like want to be a high school teacher that's also got a landscape company and coach soccer. And then it was, one class at Michigan State. So I got accepted at Michigan State after going and spending a weekend with my brother. I'm like, this is the place I want to be.
Yeah.
Get accepted. And I took one horticultural class, intro to horticulture. And I didn't even know what the word meant, right? I'd been working landscaping since I was about 14, 15 years old. Never knew what horticulture meant.
Yeah.
And I take the classes with Marcus Duck, and I was a sleeper. I was a chronic sleeper in class. Like you put me in a high school setting, I'm going to sleep because I read the book the night before. I already know what you're going to talk about. I'm prepped enough so that I can wake up and answer a question. So you think I'm paying attention. I'm just napping in school. Right. So I'm in Marcus Duck's class, and my neck is just twisted, just going back and forth. Right. And then I was compelled enough. And it was like the big sign of, like, this is what I need to do, is when I could stay awake in class. And I was awake the entire time, just riveted after that.
Wow.
And just couldn't get enough of it. It was, it came to me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting to live your life this certain way, but still every part of it, like, well, I'm going to be business, but then own a landscaping. Oh, I'm going to be a teacher, but then also do landscaping. Then at some point you just can be like, well, why don't I just do landscaping? Like I love it so much, I want to do it on top of my already busy job. Why don't I just make that my job? And apparently this class is like, okay, I guess this is going to be it then.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That's it's interesting to know that you were super excited to go into business to do that, but then now you could focus your energy 100% of the time on plants.
Yeah. And that's the advice I give to kids now. When I talk to high school students, collegiate students, I'm like, follow your heart, man. Your passion, like what you were talking about earlier, how much I love my work and love my job and the impact that I have in the greater community and impact that I have on nature and the way that people view the world. I'm like, it'll come, There'll be times where, you get the phone call and they're like, hey, your credit card's due. And I'm like, I could tell you how to have the best tomato. So like, can we exchange that knowledge? Like, I know that my credit card's due and I'm working paycheck to paycheck, but like, have you ever had a amazingly perfect ripe tomato right off the vine that's this heirloom tomato? And then you try to think of ways, with social media, with the way that the world's changed, there's markets for that. You have someone, I know I talked about it earlier, Alexis, the black forager. She loves foraging. She's out there eating stuff from the wild, and she's making it work. It's amazing. Everybody I talk to knows her. And maybe for some kids that's not their dream. Maybe it's just, I want to grow plants and I want to work in a greenhouse, and I don't like people as much, but I love plants. I'm like, well, you could work at the best greenhouse in the world and see plants from all over the world and find other people like you. And I think far often today we just focus on, and that's what I did. It was like, what job can I make the most money straight out of college?
Yep.
Supply chain management at the time was super hot. I went to a career fair, and I wish I knew the guy's name, right? We're at this career fair and I talked to a supply chain logistic manager.
It sounds awful.
right? I'm like, today's day and age would be a rough go, right?
It sounds awful, but that's what my sister does that kind of too. So
oh, okay, there you go. There you go. And I was like, dude, why do you love your job? Was my first question to him.
Yeah.
That was, just imparted on me. Ask him why they love their job, and he goes, golf. Sounds like golf. And he goes, I make enough money that I can go to the best golf courses anywhere in the world, and I'm like, I'm moving stuff around the world. He's like, eventually, like there could be AI and computers that could take my job away from me, and then I would retire and I would play golf. Right.
But then as that kid, you could just say, well, why don't you just do something with golf then? Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm like, they're superintendents do well for themselves, man.
Sure.
A buddy of mine's John Torres. He's a graduate from Owens too. He graduated, I think, right before I started at Owens, right before you were there.
Okay.
And John's the head of grounds and the head of the facilities for Talent Energy, which I think actually Subaru Field now, the Philadelphia Union, MLS, okay. So like Major League Soccer. And if you talk to John, a passionate guy, loves soccer, but was like, hey, I'm almost good enough to be a pro, but I'm probably not going to be a pro. Mm-hmm. What can I do? And John now runs the entire facility, the fields. He has his staff out there, and they're one of the top rated athletic sports fields in the country.
Yeah.
And he's passionate. And he's like, this is the perfect blend, right? My day, I spend all day working with soccer players, working with coaches, working with the team on making the best field possible. Because in one sport where the field matters the most, mm-hmm. Soccer's where it's at.
Yeah.
And he's been able to make innovations as to like the way the ball travels over soil where there's more bulk density. And I hope I'm not giving away any of his secrets, or like, if you water this part of the grass, as a soccer player, if it's a hard surface, the ball's going to roll faster. Mm-hmm. Right. And if you don't have as much turf there and it's more matted down, the ball's going to roll faster. It could bounce differently. Like the turf matters most in the world's most subscribed sport. Right.
Yeah.
Everybody in the world loves soccer, I hope.
Well, except the United States.
Yeah. Like, oh, come on, man. It's coming. No, and like, here he is. And he's like, I didn't make it as a pro, but I am a pro.
Yeah.
And I'm there, longevity. This is my career. This is my passion. So that same kid that you're talking about, that's like, I want to be an accountant and I also want to be a wide receiver. And you're like, man, you look at the longevity of a wide receiver. Calvin Johnson, one of the best wide receivers ever. Like what, 9 years?
Yeah.
You could be the accountant for the team, or maybe work for, Jay-Z as an agent.
Yeah.
You could put your entire career into it and you're surrounded by the sport.
Yeah.
Like where can you combine those niches?
That's what, you talked about. Most people want to go for money, right? Hey, they make a lot of money here or money there. And I always tell kids, one of my favorite things to do, I'm sure I talked about it here on the podcast, is every fall when we're out there practicing football, when I'm just talking to kids, when it's a defensive day and I'm an offensive coach, I'm talking to some kids, and I always ask the seniors, like, hey, what do you want to do? What are you doing next year? What do you want to do for a job? This and that. And they have a wide range of stuff, but my main point to them is, whatever you do, make sure it's something you love to do, because if you love to do it, you'll learn to live with that, whatever the amount of money they're going to pay you. If you go for a job right away because you're going to make $100,000, you might not like it, and then I feel like you're always chasing that money, and then and maybe you won't be happy. But if you're happy with what you're doing, then 30, 40, 50, 20, whatever they're going to pay you, you're going to be happy with it, because you get up, your alarm goes off at 4:00 because it's a blizzard and you got to go to work. It makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, totally. And you also know how to make the best tomatoes.
Yeah.
Right. So like you're going to eat well. Like the benefits of horticulture and knowing plants is like, we all have to eat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's people out there that will pay well to know how to access that knowledge. Mm-hmm. Right. I remember I was having.
Go ahead.
I was having surgery and I had an esthetician or a nurse anesthetist.
Yeah. And
like I was going under, and they loved having me there. I had a couple procedures in a row. And like every time as we're doing the countdown, like count from 100 backwards, he's like, no. Instead of counting backwards, can you give me some advice on how to pinch off like my dahlia so I get him to branch out more? Can you tell me a little bit of horticultural knowledge right before you go under? Because like, and this is someone that is getting paid a lot of money to be there.
Yeah.
And you're just like, hey, I'm the teacher at Owens. But the knowledge is just as valuable, you know?
Can I tell you, when I found out what determinate and indeterminate tomatoes were, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to change how I garden my tomatoes. And because I built this huge like trellis, like, hey, these tomatoes are just going to keep growing. If if it's 10 feet tall, they're just going to keep going up this. Like, I was all excited about this, and it's just a little thing. And I've been growing tomatoes for a while, but I found this thing. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a difference. You're just not going to grow tomatoes. There's different ways to do it, or how to, pinch off all the I forget what it's called, but all the like shoots in the middle of the branches. Yes. Yeah. So it like all the little things that, even though I've been gardening for a while, like learning new things all the time. I will tell you, the hardest thing to do is be in landscaping and then come home and do more landscaping. So,
yeah.
Or if you've been
keep work at work is what most people say. And it's like, Where do you travel to? I travel to other gardens. Yeah. What do you do on your free time? I listen to other people. I have Hort Happy Hour. Like at the beginning of the pandemic, I was so thirsty to connect with my peers, right? Because you're like, I miss it. Like I work at Longwood Gardens. We bring in the top peers all around the world. Then I started Hort Happy Hour. So for an entire year, we only missed 6 Thursdays.
Wow.
And I brought people from all over the world. We had friends in Croatia and France and all over. And we would just get together. We'd sketch things out. We were doing like, every time we would do like a doodle.
Yeah.
And I was like, what plant? If you could have one plant with you during the apocalypse, what would you have? Right. And like one of the guys is like, easy, bamboo. Building structure, it's edible. I'm going to make a raft. I'm going to have a house. Like, I'm going to be able to catch water. It's bamboo. And the next person's like, I want grains. And you're like, fine. They're like, yeah, like rice, because it's going to be able to survive. And it's, I can thatch a roof with it and all this, and then you have the next person is like, I'd like my grandmother's Christmas cactus, because if it's the end of the world, I want to see it bloom one more time.
Yeah. Wow. That's so crazy. Yeah.
And you had people from all walks of life be a part of this. And I'd say that in many ways, it was what helped get me through,
Sure.
Like you're indoors, mental health. Obviously, I live in 490 square foot. 12 hours away from my family. And I'm like locked in a box. And you know me well enough to know like that's a problem.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So I'm like getting outside, being alone in nature. The Pine Barrens was a big part of that. I was going to the Pine Barrens once a week. I was trying to do a new hike 2 to 3 times a week to someplace I hadn't been to locally. And then, connecting with my peers on that was one of the blessings that we had over the last 2 years. And you meet likewise people, right?
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
So you're in that group and you're like indeterminate tomatoes and all this. And I'm like, well, there's probably someone in here who's like in France. It's probably Yovan. And he's like, yeah, we have a 20-foot tall structure and it's all perfectly done and elaborately embellished because it's a French formal garden.
I'm spelling out the word tomato with my plant.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I have to admit, man, seeing you as a podcaster, you definitely have that same energy that you're putting it all in. And you were the last person. I don't know if I'm going to disclose too much about your past here to the audience, but you were one of the shyest students I had.
Oh yeah. I've said that before. I've said that on this before. Like I never thought I would be coaching, talking in front of people, interviewing people. I mean, next or a couple Fridays from now, I'm giving hour-long presentations in front of Perrysburg faculty and staff about racism and that kind of stuff. I mean, if I would have told you that back when I was going to school, you're like, yeah, right. When are you going to get up there and talk for 30 seconds and get down? So
we all knew you had it. We all knew you had it in you.
Sure. Yeah.
Chris and I, we talk about you and the other students, obviously, because he's my best friend. We'd be up at 3 a.m. watching Michigan State basketball, grading papers, and being like, Lorenzo, great guy, just amazing. I just wish he would talk more in class. Like, he can captivate his classmates.
Yeah. Like,
he could galvanize them to do amazing things, and you have that power in you. It's great to see it unlocked. And, if they're waiting for the blue check verified from your other podcasters, as your former instructor, I could say that you were shy. Really 100%, shy.
100%. I actually, when I look back at it, I go, because I was thinking about it before, like in class and stuff, I go, you say that, and I'm like, I felt like that's the most I ever talked, but it still came out as me being shy.
Every once in a while, though, something would trigger you and you'd go off on it. You could tell that passion, like whether it was football or something about, design or landscaping. And you were just like, man, I really like this. And you would just go off and we're like, yes, take that and apply it all the way to everything.
Either that or be a better student because you're not quite there yet either.
No, man, no, never felt that way.
There was a couple of things where if I had Mr. Foley on right now, the first thing is like, yeah, your capstone was an issue. You like half started 3 times and never finished things. And after a while, you're just like, all right, you have all these ideas. We're going to say we worked on all these things and this is your capstone. So let's finish this and get you out of here. I did enjoy being there. Like I like being there. I think what I liked most about it is because there were so many non-traditional students. I like being a part of that because I always felt weird going back to school at the age I did. And I was still young. I wasn't as old as some of the other people in there, but I always felt like, man, I'm late, I'm behind, but then you look around and you're like, well, no one's really behind. They're just deciding to do something different or starting differently. And I'm glad that, you guys saw, especially in me, like, hey, this is he likes this stuff. And especially because how I went about picking what I wanted to go to Owens for, I took that catalog, flipped through the book and dog-eared everything that interests me. And I just kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And then the 2 things left were landscape and turf grass management and x-ray tech. And those were the 2 things. Okay. And then I was like, you know what? The big difference between these is one's outside and one's inside. So I'm gonna go with the thing that's outside. And that's what drew me to it. And then with the help of you guys and some of the other, even though our soil science teacher, I think his name was Craig.
Craig, yeah.
Dude, that dude, there was something about him that I really enjoyed. I think he was so big, but I felt like his voice was so small.
Yeah.
Me. Yeah. And it was just a strange thing, but he seemed to enjoy I gotta take the soil science class and it doesn't seem exciting at all. And even the way he presented it wasn't, but the information that was there was like, oh yeah, this is pretty cool.
I remember Craig and we had 2 very different teaching styles. And I remember having a conversation with him about cation exchange capacity. So like one of the nerdiest things, right? But it's one of the most critical factors is soil. And they brought me into Owens to teach soils. That was the first class that I taught. Okay. Right. And I'm like, oh, great. New guy on campus. And I'm teaching soil science. The kids are going to love me. Right. And then I'm in there. I'm 24 years old. And as you mentioned, a lot of the students were older. So we had a lot of non-traditional students. And I don't remember who all was in that first class. Maybe Marty Gaster. Yeah. Right. And I'm sitting down. I'm waiting. And I'm just sitting and absorbing at what everybody's listening to, saying. And I had the name up on the board, Mr. Ross and all this. And I'm just sitting back with the rest of the students. And it's my first class. They don't know who I am. They don't know anything about me. And I'm sitting down and I'm just listening. And it's like 5 minutes are past. And I'm like, 5-minute rule. If this guy doesn't show up, we're out of here, right? Like 2 or 3 of them were like, yeah, that's right. We got 1 minute. We're going to get out of here. And the whole time I'm just soaking it up like a sponge and I'm loving it. Right. So, because teaching is a lot of theater, right? It is, yeah. You got to make it engaging, you got to make it fun. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go stand up in front of everybody. And yeah, by the way, I'm your teacher. I've
been here the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. And it came like 2 or 3 weeks later, it's cation exchange capacity. So the ability of a soil to hold on to nutrients. Mm-hmm. It's one of the most critical factors when you look at soil health. And I'm like, how do you teach this? Like, this is some dry stuff, right? Yeah. Oh, if you have this binding agent from this soil particle is going to be able to absorb 1 free cation, right? And you're reading this and you're like, that's not fun, right? So you're like, what can I do? Red Rover, bring your cation over. Right. So you line up in the hall and you start off as sand and there's like 4 people. There's 2 on each side of the wall. And then people come through and they have to put their arm out and try to grab the cation. Right. Like freeze tag.
Yeah. Well,
then you have, clay soil and they get a lot closer and they have 1 hand out. And now it's 8 students or 10 students instead of 4 students. And someone's walking through and you got to grab the cation. Look at all the fertilizer the soil can hold. And you're like, now you're organic matter. You get both hands and both feet. There's nobody getting by you, right? And there's 40 of you, and there's 1 cation, and like that's why it's so tightly held.
Yeah.
And I remember our department chair walking by and being like, "What is this new teacher doing?" Like all the people in nursing and x-ray techs, they're like out looking in the hallway. Like, what is going on out there?
Yeah.
This is amazing, And that was part of what made it fun. It was wild, man.
What did you, when you came up with that idea, were you right away like, this is going to be a hit? Or were you still apprehensive?
No, I was probably like the night before, and I'm like, how can I still, because you're fresh into the gates and you have another job too.
Yeah.
You're like, how can I make this fun? Like, what would be fun? And you're just thinking in your mind, I'm like, Felix the cat for cat ions. Like, what could we do with that? Like, play a cartoon or something. We had soil genesis. I'm blaring like Phil Collins. And I'm like, the earth begins with soil genesis, just like how rock begins with this little number right here from Phil Collins on the drums. Right. When I did the cat ion exchange one, I remember I was like staying up late, which was common with Chris. And I'm like, what if we do Red Rover? Cat ion's moving through. It's a person.
Yeah.
Because I hated chemistry. I did not like chemistry at all. Like I took, I know you had a funny story about having class with your mom. Mine was my sister.
Oh, okay.
So at Michigan State, my sister followed through. The whole family's all green and white. And we're in chemistry class. And there's 400 people in the lab or 400 people in the class. And then they have your lab assignments based on your last name. No one knows anybody. It's totally impersonal, which is great for chemistry because you don't want people to know who you are.
Yeah.
Right. You're sitting back in class and they're like, oh, we're going to have everybody pair up for labs and we're going to go by your last name. And then they call your sister and you out. Right. So our last name's Ross, obviously. I'm M.A., Matt, and she's Megan, M.E. So it's like, well, Matthew and Megan, the odds of her being my chemistry partner are 50-50 at this point. Either we're going to pair up or like we're going to split and I'm going to go with whoever else is like Rost.
Yeah.
Right. And they announce it and the teacher's like, oh, that's adorable. Are you guys related? And I'm like, in front of 400 people at Michigan State, come on. What are you doing?
Adorable.
I'm like, now I'm adorable. Thanks. Like, really looking forward to watching this on E-Bombs World someday.
How'd you find your way to Owens?
Oh man. Chris.
Okay.
Chris was an alum from Michigan State.
Mm-hmm.
My brother was living in Toledo at the time. My brother and sister-in-law both did their residency in Toledo. My brother was at ProMedica, and my sister-in-law was at St. V's, I think.
Okay.
And he had moved to Toledo, and again, following in my brother's footsteps. I was like, oh man, there's a botanic garden there. That's pretty cool. And I'm like, I'm getting my master's. I want to teach and I want to work in the field. Right. And right before the job at Owens, I had thought, do I want to go to Chicago? That's where I always wanted to live. It's an amazing city. And there were some landscape jobs, but there was no teaching involved. Right. So again, it's like, I want to blend both worlds. And then I thought about doing a PhD and I went down to Purdue and I was a prospective PhD student. And I got some fantastic advice from the guys that I was going to work under. Dr. Mickelbart from Purdue is like, wow, this is great. We're going to work on like biochemistry. We're going to do some genetic analysis and we're going to do some basic science. And I was like, oh man, I don't know. Like, and he's like, if you don't know and you want to do a PhD and there's any bit of doubt and you're not like, if your nerd brain isn't firing over like tree biochemistry,
yeah,
then like, this isn't going to work. Like, you have the other jobs lined up. And at this point I had already applied and interviewed at Toledo Botanic. He's like, take the other jobs, man.
Yeah.
He's like, you're at Purdue's one of the top schools in the nation. And he's like, you're at one of the top schools in the nation and you're a candidate. So like, this is transferable. You can come back someday. But if you're not 100% in the next 4 to 5 years of your life is going to the lab and checking out like the cellular level of plants, then you probably don't want to be here. And the next day it was like serendipitous. I got the call from Owens and it was Chris and we just totally hit it off.
Nice.
That as a student, I mean, he's a great guy and really helped mentor me. And I started with soil science, plant science lab. And then I was helping as a lab walk for woody plants. That was my first year. And then every year I just got progressively more involved at Owens. And I'm like, what's the next step? And that's when, I don't know if you remember Toledo Grows and Michael Zaberla.
You started the urban ag stuff at Owens.
Yeah,
right?
that's how I went full-time at Owens.
Okay.
So I met Mike Zaberla. For anybody who's out there that knows him, like one of the most amazing human beings, who was like, I'm blending horticulture, agriculture, and social justice together.
Yeah.
Right. As much as it was about growing food, it was about bringing together the community. It was about showing that there's a place for minorities in agriculture, outside of just being, the traditional ag worker.
Yep.
There's other opportunities out there. And what he did and the community, with help of the Anderson Corporation and Toledo Grows, was showed a lot of at-risk youth. And then we actually worked with incarcerated youth too, that there's a place for you in horticulture and agriculture. And man, there is nothing more powerful than the very first time I went to Toledo Grows and met some of the young men that were working with him, and young women that were growing crops, that fell in love with it. And I was like, whatever I do professionally right now, I need to be a part of this.
Yeah.
And that was when we recognized the niche that, like, man, we could have a certificate for students in urban agriculture, so they could come through the program with Michael and work with Toledo Grows and either volunteer, or some of them are court adjudicated. And then you've got a pathway to college, and it's through plants. It's through being outdoors. It was amazing. It was way ahead of its time, I think, because
I think so
eventually
too.
the college didn't recognize, in my opinion, what that meant to the community and what that meant to the larger picture and the bigger picture of social justice, where it's like, if nothing else, they learn how to teach themselves how to eat and appreciate, raising their own food, that's going to empower them. So even if they're working an hourly job and they go home at night and they have their own vegetable garden, they're richer for it. And I think the college just was a little short-sighted in that, and it was turbulent times, and there was economic collapse and everything else too. So unfortunately, the certificate doesn't exist anymore. But that was an amazing program, and I was very happy for my time in Toledo.
How long were you at Owens?
6 years.
Wow, that's I didn't even realize it was that long, but yeah, that's well, you definitely made an impact, obviously, and then I think you're right. It was definitely ahead of its time, because if something were like that to pop up now, not only would I think it'd be thriving, but I think it'd get recognition too, as far as like, hey, look at this new program that's happening around Toledo, because it's like you said, it helps people appreciate all that kind of stuff. And I know whether they do or not, food always seems to taste better when we have to take care of it, when it's in our backyard. Yeah, I love when my kids go to our raspberry patch and just pull raspberries off and eat them. Same thing with strawberries. They always ask, like, Dad, can we have strawberries? I go, hey, if they're out in the yard, they're free game. If your friends are over and they want some, go for it. Just make sure you're washing the sand off. But other than that, like, let it go. I attached our berry garden to their sandbox, so sometimes all that stuff will creep over into their sandbox too. And so I didn't even think about it, but I think I'm glad I did that, because now when they're playing, not so much now because they're older, but when they were playing in there, they could see that stuff. They're like, oh, can we eat that? And then
snacks, like every kid's dream.
Yes.
And I would want to clarify. I mean, I did it. I'm very grateful for the opportunity Owens invested in the program. I mean, it wasn't just, being ahead of its time. It was that they took a rider on us, and the work that we did, it still has a lasting legacy. So Toledo Grows is still very much alive and active, and they're still changing lives through community gardens, through their workforce development programs. And on the college, it was a tough choice. It was
sure,
and then it coincided with my departure as well. So it was a difficult decision. But if it wasn't for Owens, I don't know if the Oneida Center would have been able to be furnished and built, and that we had 3 great years with students learning urban ag, and many of those students do great things now. It was a shame that it wasn't galvanized more, that people didn't notice the power of urban agriculture. It was right when Detroit was really starting to rise up through the power of growing plants and really seeing that green revival of the city. And now it's like the coolest thing, right? You move to a city because you want a community garden plot, right? You're like, oh man, I'm moving to Denver. I got to be in the Cherry Creek community garden plot. It's like competitive. And then like our counterparts back in Europe are like, yeah, we've been doing this for a couple hundred years, guys. I don't know why this is such a hard concept for you.
But I know when I'm driving around and there's vacant lots, that's what I think about too. It's like, oh man, that'd be cool to have a garden there, or this, or hey, there's just an empty parking lot. Why can't we just take that out, put a garden there? But I take it too with I said it before, but my neighbors on both sides of me, I use some of their yard to grow vegetables, and I just let them know like, hey, here's what we're growing this year, or ask them what they want to grow, and then I'll take care of it. It's on your property. I'll take care of it. And whenever you guys want to go out there, pick whatever you guys want to pick. And, we're going to share this thing. But I told Andrew, like, if something were to happen, I want the people around me to know how to grow food.
Yeah.
Because it's just like we said, it's important. And if we can survive together when times are good, then we can hopefully survive together when they're not so good. So, but I do, I'd like to expand that to other neighbors, but I might be need to wait a little bit more till people realize like, hey, we can't just have people in my backyard growing vegetables randomly.
Exactly. They're out there. They're in the chase, sitting down reading a book, and people are just coming in grabbing food. Yeah. I'll tell you what, though, during the pandemic, a good friend of mine, Mara Tyler, she's a flower farmer, the farm at Oxford, really amazing dahlia grower. And it's more than that, but she was right as the pandemic hit, right? She was one of the last teachers that taught a program for us. And like the very next day, it's like, we're shutting everything down.
Oh, wow.
And we were talking, and she's like, well, I got to figure out what I'm going to do for a vegetable garden for my family. Cause like, I don't want to go to the store.
Yeah.
And the two of us got together, and it was this great synthesis. So the last, 2 years, 2 growing seasons, we've had this big family farm plot, right? This vegetable garden that I've been back, vegetable gardening again, doing a lot of the same stuff that I was doing at Owens, that small scale agriculture. Mm-hmm. And that skill set kept us fed, I didn't have to go to the grocery store. It was great.
Is that the one you'd always go live on when you were?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. It was cool.
Yeah. I liked it. It's, I'd have more garden spaces if I didn't have kids, but they also need grass to run around on and do stuff. Like, hey, don't go over there. The zucchinis are growing over there. Stay out of there, but it's all strategically placed right now. But eventually I even told Andrea, I was like, we're not gonna have a front yard eventually. Just prepare yourself. That might not be for another 10 years, but I'm going to take it over eventually.
It's going to be chives. There's going to be a 4-year-old kid whose grandmother hooked him up with some chives. He goes out in the front lawn, and you're like, pull out all the grass and just leave the chives.
We do have chives, but we only have one, so they're not everywhere.
Like, instead of mowing, you're out there precisely chopping it and bagging it.
Like, what's up with this guy mowing his grass with scissors? Get him out of there.
Revive Johnny Depp, and you're like, this is Edward Scissorhands, and he's going to be collecting all the chives for your fine dining tonight.
After Owens, you went to Longwoods, correct?
Yep.
And you've been there ever since. Besides you, I've never heard of Longwoods. So besides the information that you put out and see, can you explain to people what it is that you guys do there?
Yeah, totally. So Longwood Gardens is the lasting legacy and the living legacy of Pierre DuPont. So the industrialist of the DuPont company purchased about 200 acres in 1906 at 33 years old when he was running the DuPont company and having a great time exploring the world and being fascinated by fountains and gardens and trees. And he found this property here situated in Brandywine Valley, which is about 30 miles south of Philadelphia. And was like, I want to have the world's greatest garden. And really, he created it. Mm-hmm. It's 1,100 acres about. It's got a show fountain that rocks anything else in the world. So we renovated it 2014 to 17. It was a $92 million renovation to give you kind of scale and scope.
Yeah. Wow.
It's the largest residential garden I've ever seen. Cause he lived here on property.
Okay.
And it's one part of that like 3-legged stool. So performing arts is a big part of what we do. He had John Philip Sousa playing, like the marching band was here, and he would have fountain shows with him and all kinds of amazing things happening during his heyday. And now we bring in like great musical acts. We have a choreographed fountain show that even includes fire jets. So some pretty amazing stuff. And then the other parts of the three legs are fine horticulture and gardening and design. So it's one of the most elaborately designed gardens you'll see anywhere in the country and anywhere in the world. We have a 92 or 86 acre meadow, which is all Chester County native plants, which is really, really impressive. Mm-hmm. And the commitment to the natural lands is really strong. But then we also have a commitment to plant exploration, research, and display. We have a huge project going on right now. Our conservatory is being reimagined. And when it's done being built, it's going to be the most amazing blend of the old world and the new and the futuristic side of things. Mm-hmm. So his conservatory was built 1919 to 1921. I think it maxed out around 4.5 acres, and it's incredible. For those of you that haven't been to Philadelphia to see this garden, it's breathtaking. The other third part of the stool is education. That's where I fit in.
Okay.
And in continuing education, we run about 200 programs a year. We have free online programs as well as paid opportunities. We engaged with, through our free online programs, we've had about 20,000 students worldwide. We have partnerships with North Carolina State, with the Creamery, that amazing place I was telling you about earlier, where we do plantology on tap. And we have about 5 or so thousand students every year in continuing ed. We have free virtual field trips for kids all around the world. We're one of the top virtual field trip providers as well. So a real strong commitment to education. We have a fellowship program. We have a 2-year residential program where people come from all walks of life to be trained in fine horticulture.
I was gonna ask you about that, because there was a student at Perrysburg who also, I coached in junior high track, and she worked for me at Pearson this summer. But she was like, I don't know what I want to do. You know, I think I'm going to go to she told me a 4-year school she's going to go to, but she has her own landscaping business. She wants to get in horticulture, but she specifically said, after I'm done getting my degree, I want to go to Longwoods. And she talked about that 2-year program. And I told her, I said, well, if you want to do it after high school or whenever you do, let me know, because I know someone who works there. And he can give you all kinds of information. But she's the one who brought that up to me. And I thought that was
that's
a
powerful.
really cool thing too. Like she was all excited about it. And then the program itself, like, oh, you can go there and like be there and be immersed and all that stuff.
2 years free schooling, and they pay you as a staff member, and you get housing.
Yeah. I thought that was
an awesome program.
Yeah.
And then depending on where you want to go, they do have some articulation agreements where that then counts as 2 years of college towards a 4-year degree.
Oh, okay.
So we've had students that have taken advantage of that articulation agreement as well. And we also have a really, really great internship program. So it's interesting when you're in the public gardening world, anywhere you're at in the world, the minute you say Longwood Gardens, they're like, oh, I know so-and-so that was there, or I worked there, or I was an intern in 76, I was an intern in 92, or I was a pro hort, or I was a Longwood graduate fellow. And it's really heartwarming. You know, our industry is very small. You can, you know, it's kind of humbling at times, but it's also really eye-opening that when you're in public horticulture and landscaping and, you know, in those industries, how many people have been impacted by one garden. And if you look back at like 1906 and you told Pierre DuPont, like, you're going to engage with some of the top leaders in the world at some point in time as being the place where they got their fundamentals and a place where they honed their craft, I'm sure he would have loved it.
Yeah. It sounds like an amazing place that no matter what you're into, is you can get something out of it.
Totally.
I mean, you just rattle off so many things, and I'll put the website too in the show notes, so if people want to know more information. Also, if you don't mind, I'll put your email in there too, if people want to get a hold of you about certain stuff.
I'd love to have your student come out here and see it in person, and really inspiring the next generation is a big part of my life. And if she doesn't get into Longwood, there are other programs out here too, and other gardens for her to see. I mean, people when friends come from the Midwest, they come out to Philadelphia, and they're like, there's 37 major gardens in 30 miles. They're like, what? And they're like, yeah, like birthplace of America's gardens, right?
Yeah, okay.
Like, so like, if you think about it, a lot of the, you know, the Thomas Jeffersons, the Ben Franklins of the world were obsessed with plants.
Mhm.
Even before them. I mean, like if you look at Alexander von Humboldt and you know, all of the great geniuses of their era, the polymaths of their era, plants was where it was at.
Yeah.
You know, like that was a big part of the reason why America was, you know, for what it was, a colonial establishment, was because of plants. I mean, it was plants, and obviously the other things that came along with that. Unfortunately, you know, one of the big things was that it was plant exploration.
Yeah. You
look at John and William Bartram and the work that they did to catalog North America's flora and then send it back to the colonial power. That's essentially the essence of what created a lot of the public gardens in this country. Yeah. And then you had, you know, David Hossick, who has a bit part in Hamilton the musical, who was the doctor for Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton, had this garden called Elgin Garden. And he was, you know, doing that where Rockefeller Center is right now. But really from like New York all the way down to DC is this just massive hub of horticulture. Yeah. And when you get to see like the legacy of those individuals, as well as people like the DuPont family, where, you know, your cousins have like one of the largest mansions in the world, and they're like, I love plants, and these are the plants that I love. Like, I want a French formal garden in the middle of Wilmington, Delaware. And then my other cousin, he's into romantic gardens, and he's going to have azaleas and this giant carpet of azaleas and understory bulb plants from Europe. And then Pierre's like, I love fountains, and like, I want to make the engineering aspect of gardening be a reality for the public and for my friends to see these amazing, elaborate shows. And it gets almost into a bit of a competition.
Sure.
And then we benefit from that today, because if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have these massive gardens that can truly inspire others. And then it trickles down. So you've got all the smaller gardens, and you've got, you know, Chanticleer, like the most amazingly beautiful garden. It's I always joke around and say, like, I'm married to Chanticleer, or I'm married to Longwood, and I'm definitely going out to see Chanticleer more often. Like it's my weekend getaway, my vacation in town is going to Chanticleer to see how passionate those gardeners are and the combinations that they make. And that's less than 50 acres. Yeah. So it doesn't need to be a huge garden to change your lens.
Well, you definitely make me want to plan a trip out there now, because it's just looking at stuff. And we did that a few times at Owens, going to different arboretums and stuff. And that's the one thing I like about TBG as opposed to the other metro parks, that things are labeled. Like, I love labeling, because I don't know, no one knows everything, but it's cool to see all these plants and having scientific names. My wife always asks me, like, why do they have scientific names? I go, well, first of all, they're fun. A lot of them are funny and they're cool to say. Second of all, you can take that, and it's, this scientific name is the same here and same in Canada and the same in China. Like, it's the same everywhere. So people can speak the same language, even if they don't really speak the same language. So,
and then you get in really in-depth plant nerdy conversations. Like with my friends yesterday, I was at the Smithsonian to see the Futures exhibit, and hang out with some of the gardeners from the Smithsonian, the horticulturalists there, as well as friends that are landscape architects. And we literally had like a 15-minute aside about Agastache, or is it Agastaki, or Agastache, or Agastaki? And then, like, one of them, she's British, and she's like, I'm never going to correct your English because you've all gone far off the deep end.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and you know, you have these awesome conversations, and you're like, it's spelled the same. So if we just write it, we're good.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there you go.
We don't even have to say it.
Well, even all those pronunciations, you can still picture the word. So even if we are pronouncing it wrong, it's still you still know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
All right. We talked about all this love of plants and love of everything. What's your favorite plant? Tree, shrub, food?
Oh,
like,
man.
do you have one favorite plant or a family of plants that you like?
Oh man. Do you have a favorite kid, Lorenzo?
No, but I have what I like more.
So yeah, I mean, you got to add the qualifiers of someone like me, right? So
Sure,
you ask most people, they're like, "Oh, I love irises or peonies."
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So like, we're talking herbaceous temperate. Are we talking about tropical hardwood?
Well, how about this? Give me. You got to have like a few. So
Yeah,
you
I got
narrow
a
it down
few.
to one, but give me a few.
Yeah, the Victoria. It's the largest water platter in the world.
Okay.
Totally captivating, right? It's a plant that's got spikes. It can grow 20 foot in space in a year. We started from seed, and they've got like big thorny spikes and big lips on the edge of the pad, so that they actually act as like a battering ram and rip up all the vegetation around.
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, man. Plants are cool. Like a lot of people forget about this. That like they're in this world to compete and to procreate and sustain themselves, right? So just like human beings, they're going to do whatever they can to fight back, right? I don't know if you remember. I didn't have all the Foleyisms that Chris had, but one of my taglines was "Plants are in the business to survive."
Yeah.
Right? And you got to remember that, and they're going to do everything they can to make that happen.
Yeah.
So that's a really cool plant that has a long history here at Longwood too. And I would say from a aquatic standpoint, that and Aquarius is a really awesome water lily or foxfire. From a tree standpoint, that's hardy here. I have really great memories with bald cypress. Going through the Everglades, I did a plant exploration out there where we saw, we're in chest high water, full of alligators and snakes and all that fun stuff. Freaking out a little bit because I'm from Michigan and I'm like, there's nothing in our waters that'll kill you.
Except the algae, apparently.
Yeah. That would. Yeah, we don't want to go into that. But I have some really fond memories of bald cypress. The Pinus rigida, or this is a favorite. That's a big one in the pine barrens, and there's something magical about it. Mm-hmm. The one I want to see. So I've got like Gone in 60 Seconds when he had that Shelby that was his dream.
Yeah.
I got a couple of those. So Helonius ballata is swamp pink, and swamp pink grows in New Jersey. It's critically endangered. I think it's it's definitely endangered. It's very rare.
Okay.
And I know where the population is. I've seen it multiple times, and I just got to, somebody's got to tell the deer and the bunnies and everything else not to eat it when it's going to bloom. But seeing it in the wild would be something that I'm really looking forward to. I've seen it in cultivation. It's a beautiful plant. They're actually really easy to grow from the standpoint of propagation, but very niche in the landscape.
Okay.
And then I'm obsessed with a lot of native orchids. I like the turquoise and jade color, the strondylon or the jade vine. I could go on and on, man.
Sure, yeah.
Rainbow eucalyptus is if I'm going tropical hardwood, that would be up there. That's wild. What about you, man? What would be your favorite plant?
So mine, and I've loved it since the first time I saw it when I started my first landscaping job that I got through the Owens had a job fair that I got through there. Mm-hmm. The business is no longer there, but it's Premier Gardening with Margie. And but I saw the first time I saw a smoke bush, I'm like, what is this? It looks so weird. I've never seen anything like it before. And I love that plant enough where I bought one. I think there was someone I worked with there. Someone they knew was at a had a business and they were going out of business. So I bought a smoke bush. I planted it I have an apartment at the time. So I planted it at my in-laws, and it's still there now. It's survived a couple rejuvenation prunings that were necessary because everything else died. But it's still there, and it's so, I don't know. I really like that. There is someone in my neighborhood who has a Metasequoia glyptostroboides.
Yeah, there's that name. That's a fun name to say.
Yes, I love that. And every time when we walk around the neighborhood, I love staring at that tree. It's so straight. It's right in their front yard. But that's one of my favorite trees too. And really, in my backyard, it's a lot of like normal landscaping plants because I buy all the plants, but I also know that I don't want to get too exotic because I have to take care of it, and people, my kids are gonna be running around, so nothing like too expensive. But I do like lilacs. I have lilacs in my backyard. They're real easy to grow, and they're right by a window where we open it in the springtime, and the scent comes in the house. I do have to move them because I always think of Chris because he always, everyone says right plant, right place, and these are definitely not the right place. They're too big. So I got to move them around a little bit. But yeah, those are the plants I like. I like, they seem to me, and I always try to tell people too, like, because they'll ask like, what's your favorite plant or what's this? And to me, like the plants I named are pretty readily available. People can get them. They're not like they're super common, but that doesn't change the fact that I like them. I like these things, and regardless of everyone has them or nobody has them, it's something I like. So that's why some of these things are in my yard, and finding new, like I love finding new annuals. Like I got this thing called a popcorn plant a few years ago.
Yeah.
I saw it, and there was a lady at this little garden center that I would go to every year to buy my annual. She goes, check that out. I what is that? She goes, it's called a popcorn plant. Rub it and smell your fingers. I'm like, oh my gosh, it smells just like popcorn. It's amazing.
Yes. Yep.
So I planted that, and that thing got huge.
Oh yeah.
So I had no idea when I just planted it, and I had to like prune it back because it was encroaching on the driveway and my wife's car and everything. But it was cool. And then a banana plant I planted 1 year, which also got giant, and I didn't realize how much water it held. So at the end, like I cut a leaf off and I squeezed it, and so much water came out. And I'm like, this is amazing too, But I always put those weird plants in the front yard, because I like people seeing them, and then they ask me about them, and we get more nerd talk of plants and stuff. But yeah, definitely trying to find new annuals is a cool thing I like too. Even though like they die, I can't keep them around, but it's cool to grow them for the summer.
Well, Bill Albert, there's a guy out in Toledo who grows bananas year round. He's
does he?
Yeah, he uses some of the hardy ones, the bajus, and he gets a massive growth on his bananas, and He's perfected the art of overwintering bananas.
That's cool.
So there is hope out there, man. Sure. You can bring them back every year. They don't always have to be an annual. They're going to live somewhere else, year round, right? So,
yeah. All right. Well, Matt, thanks for coming on. This was awesome. I knew you for a while, but it's cool to just really get into this. And much like you, whenever there's someone that also likes plants, I can really go into that, and you have way more knowledge than I do, but it's cool I want that stuff. I want that information. Mm-hmm. And when people always ask me questions about this particular thing, I always go way more into detail because that's just how it is. Like, oh, you just wanted to know how to green up your grass. Sorry. I'll stop talking.
Yeah. People are probably like, oh, he's going to tell us how to get the best tomato. What is he talking about? Frogs and training out his parents' backyard and like, yeah. So it was nice to be able to talk a little bit deeper than just plants and really provide the backstory of how I'm such a nerd about everything else.
Yeah, man, it's awesome, and I'd love to have you back on at some point. We can talk about whatever. You're obviously an educator, so that's something you do every day is talk to people, which believe it or not doesn't always go well on this podcast. so sometimes really? You get good ones and sometimes you don't. But that's the nature of the podcast, and I'll interview anybody. So I love talking to high school kids too. So they'll come on here and talk about whatever they want to talk about. But
that's great.
Yeah. So and if this podcast is, I'm not popular enough to say no to people. So I love talking to people. So I think 2 episodes ago, there was a sophomore and his younger brother that was a water boy for us. We're on. So it's cool. Fun talking to all kinds of people, get all kinds of information. Like I said, hope you can come back on and we can talk more about whatever, because it's whatever you talk about. I'm interested, because how you put the information out to me is amazing, and I learning firsthand, not just here but also taking classes with you. I know that whoever signs up for whatever you're doing at Longwoods, they're going to get the most out of it, because you want that information out there and you love the information you're giving. So it's whatever whoever's listening to this, if you sign up for stuff with Matt Ross, you're going to get your money's worth, regardless of how much it is. So
I really appreciate it, man. It's great to see you develop into the guy we knew you were underneath that shy exterior.
Well, thanks, Matt, and thanks again for coming on. Have a good day. Yep. and I'll be talking to you.
Sounds great.
Please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. It means the world to me if we can get this podcast off the ground and running. You don't have to share all the episodes. Just share one you like. One podcast, if you share one, could turn into a subscriber down the road. So any little bit helps. My Gmail is thenerdballpodcast@gmail.com. I'm on all the social medias: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Find me at Twitter at the Nerdball Pod. Instagram is the Nerdball Podcast, and Facebook is a page at the Nerdball Podcast. Thanks to Real JP Multimedia, Cuttlefish Graphics, Perrysburg Junior High STEM, and Big Daddy Graphics for helping out the podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.